We are now live on Facebook with the program Ukraine, 1 Year of War. This is B'rith International CEO, Daniel Mariaschin.
Dear friends, distinguished guests, thank you for joining us along with B'rith U.K. and the B'rith World Center in Jerusalem as we mark the somber anniversary few of us could have anticipated not too long ago, 1 year of devastating war in Ukraine. On February 24th, 2022, the Russian Federation waged war on Ukraine, a conflagration that would soon become the largest military aggression on European soil since the end of the Second World War. People around the world will long remember the daunting feeling of trepidation turning on the news that morning 1 year ago. Within days, millions of Ukrainians were internally displaced or had become refugees, fleeing in droves to neighboring countries. Our B'rith colleagues who traveled right away to the bordering countries of Romania and Poland to lend our support to those fleeing will never forget the children, the mothers, the grandmothers arriving in the coldest of winter nights with nothing but a suitcase or a bag. In Ukraine, tens of thousands killed, full cities destroyed, and an entire nation ravaged. The scenes of horror in Bucha, in Irpin, in Mykolaiv will remain entrenched in our collective memory for years to come. More recently, we've been concerned by the supply of drones by Iran to the Russian Federation. Iran, a state sponsor of terror, a genocidal threat for the state of Israel, and a destabilizing force in the region. And this is yet another reminder to the civilized world of this clear and present danger to global peace and stability. The claims of denazification on which the Kremlin has premised its invasion reveal themselves as even more outrageous as it collaborates with a Holocaust-denying regime in Tehran. And as Russia preposterously calls out denazification, we know the war has dramatically affected Ukraine's large Jewish community, re-traumatizing the near 10,000 Holocaust survivors still living in the country at the onset of the war. It damaged Jewish cultural heritage sites in what has been a bustling center of Jewish life for centuries, even as the history of the Jewish people in Ukraine is one of both accomplishment and tragedy, and it affected sites dedicated to the memory of the Holocaust. But in the darkest of hours, the resilience and resolve of the Ukrainian people and the coming together of the international community were beacons of light and hope. In the face of the humbling scale of the conflict, we look to do our part in aiding those in the eye of danger. Our lodges across the world mobilized to welcome refugees and to deliver vital assistance within Ukraine. Our colleagues in B'rith U.K, with whom we partner on today's event, have been among those at the forefront of those efforts. But the assistance delivered throughout the last year, which continues today, is part of a larger story, one of applied commitment to the transatlantic partnership and relationship and Euro-Atlantic integration, and of arduous advocacy for the principles of the rules-based order of which democracy and freedom are cornerstone values. And today, Ukraine's fight against this unprovoked aggression has come to symbolize precisely those values, democracy and freedom. Thank you, all of you watching and our distinguished speakers, for joining us on this important day to discuss and reflect on the current state of the war, to redouble our efforts in support of those in harm's way, and to stand with Ukraine at this crucial time in our history.
Thank you, Dan. Dear friends, greetings from Brussels. My name is Alina Brickman. I'm B'rith International's Director of European Union Affairs, and I'm pleased to join Jeremy Havardi, the Director of B'rith U.K.'s Bureau of International Affairs, in moderating today's discussion. We are extremely grateful to have with us today His Excellency Michael Brodsky, Israel's ambassador to Ukraine, who's joining us following some very intense days of high-level meetings, including with President Zelensky, and Oksana Galkevich, JDC Programs Director for Ukraine, two people that are eminently positioned to speak to the current state of affairs on the ground, the situation of the Jewish community, humanitarian aid efforts to support Ukrainians both within and outside of Ukraine, and as well expectations for the period to come. This Monday, the Munich Security Conference was underway, and I recall on last year's edition, which happened just days before the war started, there was still a lot of looming uncertainty about the possibility that such an aggression could break out. So Ambassador Brodsky, 1 year in, just to get your broad panoramic perspective, how would you describe the state of the war? And do you see a chance for Ukraine to turn the tide?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to join this webinar, this conference. Indeed, it's been 1 year since the war broke out. And it's time to recall what we went through during those days. As you probably remember, we evacuated the embassy just a couple of days before the war began. We went to Lviv in the western Ukraine first, and then we crossed the border to Poland. And from there, we were assisting the Israelis who wanted to come out of Ukraine to cross the border. We were providing consular services at the crossing points. And it's been a very intense and very challenging situation, especially during the first weeks of war. After a couple of weeks, or even slightly more, number of Israelis started to decrease, and the majority of Israelis who wanted or who could leave Ukraine had done it already by that time. So we switched our focus to some different things like the humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. And this was the time when we deployed a field hospital in Ukraine, and we were the first country to do it. And also some other humanitarian activities. And also we came back to our normal political work with the Ukrainian officials, and we came back to explaining our position towards the Ukrainian public opinion in the media, in the social networks. And since then, we've been working very hard to explain our position and to keep the Israeli-Ukrainian relations on track. And as you mentioned, Alina, recently we've had two very important visits to Ukraine. First, the foreign minister, the newly appointed foreign minister, Eli Cohen, visited Ukraine, and he was the first Israeli minister to visit Ukraine over the whole period of war. And just a few days after, two members of Knesset, Yuli Edelstein and Zev Elkin, who are co-chairs of the parliamentary friendship group with Ukraine in the Knesset, also visited Kiev on the very same day when President Biden was visiting. And it was funny because President Biden's visit was a complete surprise for everyone. And at the beginning, where the whole center of Kiev was closed and there were traffic jams, so the rumors went out that it was because of the Israeli delegation who came to Kiev, but in the end, everyone understood that the reason was, of course, different. But nevertheless, they managed, despite President Biden's visit, they managed to see President Zelensky and some other high-ranked Ukrainian politicians. And of course, the Jewish community was also part of both visits, a significant part. And speaking of the Jewish community, I would say that their situation is not different. It's not different to the situation of all Ukrainians at the moment. They are facing the same problems. They're facing the same dilemmas and the same challenges as everybody else in Ukraine. They suffer from post-trauma syndrome. They suffer from devastation, especially in eastern Ukraine, and some of them became refugees. both those who went out of Ukraine, and about 15,000 of Ukrainian Jews went to Israel, others went to other countries, mainly Germany. But many others decided to stay in Ukraine, but they moved to other parts of Ukraine, especially Western Ukraine, because they couldn't stay in places like Kharkiv or Dnipro, or the houses were destroyed, and the whole life has changed since the war started. And the embassy, together with the international Jewish organizations, including your organization, from the very beginning of war, has provided very significant assistance to the Jewish community. And we are continuing to provide this assistance. Just to give you an example, when Minister Eli Cohen visited Ukraine, and the first thing we did when he arrived by train, we went to Bucha. And in Bucha, we visited an old Jewish woman, probably the only Jew who stayed in Bucha. And the Jewish community in Ukraine provides assistance to this lady. She's 82 years old. She lives alone in a house in Bucha or close to Bucha. And the minister visited her. He brought some presents like a warm blanket and a heater to assist her during this winter time. But it illustrates the situation that the Jewish community in Ukraine is facing, and it's not different to the overall situation in Ukraine. The privilege of the Jewish community is that, unlike many others in Ukraine, they get significant assistance from the world, from the Jewish world, from the Jewish organizations, and also from the state of Israel. But the war is not over. Although it's been a whole year, the war is far from being over, and no one knows, no one can predict when it will be over. So we have no choice but to continue to support Ukraine and to continue to support the Jewish community in Ukraine. And I'd like to use this opportunity to thank you also for your contribution to the Ukrainian Jewish community. It's very highly appreciated in Ukraine. It's very important, and please continue to work together with other Jewish organizations to support the Jewish community in Ukraine.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And we will dig further into some of these aspects with a lens in particular to Israel's specific engagement. And you've already touched a little bit on the humanitarian aspects of the crisis, and of course, beyond the strategic and geopolitical and military aspects, the human element, the toll that the war has taken on the civilian population is at the front of our minds, particularly today on this anniversary. And Oksana, if I can come to you, you've been at the forefront of the humanitarian response. You've been there since day one, when all the cameras were pointed at Ukraine's borders, but you're also engaged there today, even as there is perhaps less attention to the humanitarian aspect than in the starting days of the war. So if you could speak to your and JDC's efforts throughout this last year and where you are today as well. And in doing so, perhaps you can sort of flush out the takeaways about the magnitude of the humanitarian crisis and how it's compared to other moments in history where you've been involved in humanitarian action.
Thank you, Alina, and thank you for inviting me to speak to this forum about the crisis in Ukraine and about the JDC response. It's important for me to be able to speak to you because I'm wearing two hats. On the one hand, I am a JDC professional responsible for all of our operations in Ukraine. On the other hand, I'm also a Ukrainian Jew and a Ukrainian citizen who still has family in Ukraine. And that is why this crisis for me is not simply a work, but it's actually saving my people. I must say that nobody expected that it will take this scale, and nobody expected that in the 21st century, in this geographical center of Europe, if I may say so, we will be facing this humanitarian crisis. I would like maybe to take a few minutes of your attention to walk you through how it was and where we are standing now, and what we started, and how we are and where we are going now. With your permission, I will share my screen, and you can see it now, right? It's so basically, we all know that Ukraine is a big country. It's the state of is the size of the state of Texas, if I may compare it to the American realities. And the population of Ukraine before the war was about 33 million people, and then of course it started to diminish. And the Jewish population has always been evaluated at 200,000, 250,000 people in over 1,000 locations. The JDC has been working in Ukraine since the collapse of the former Soviet Union, and before that, actually, we have started back in the 1920s when there was still agro-joint. Why am I saying all of these things? We were able to provide a very fast response to the humanitarian crisis because we were already on the ground, because we already had already had 18 welfare centers and over 1,000 active volunteers, and we were already supporting a lot of people in Ukraine. So let me share with you how Kharkiv and in the beginning of the war, I don't know if you've seen many of that, but it's Kharkiv is my home city where I grew up, where I spent most of my life, where my parents and my younger brother were right before the war, still were staying there. And of course, it's a huge Jewish community with about 40,000 people. And what happened in Kharkiv actually happened throughout the whole Ukraine. Now imagine a peaceful city, a peaceful country, and all of a sudden, just one morning at 4:30 a.m., bombs are starting to fall out on your heads. And on that morning on February 24, I got a message from my brother at 5 a.m. And there was just one word in Russian. It was "bombyat." And if I translate it into English, it's like, we are being bombed. Nobody believed it. Imagine the panic. Imagine like people didn't believe that it was going on. Imagine the traffic on the roads, the traffic jams on the roads when people jumped into their cars and started heading to the western part of Ukraine. Imagine absence of petrol. Imagine absence of the products in the supermarkets. Imagine closed pharmacies. Imagine imagine all of that was just happening. So right here you can see it's a picture again. It's a picture in the railway station of Kharkiv. That's when people were trying to get away from the city and to evacuate from there. So this is the reality in which we all found ourselves just within a few hours. Basically, when I said that the JDC has been in Ukraine for already some time before that, for 30 years before that, and we've had our infrastructure, and we heard, of course, that this might happen. that is why we prepared for this. That is why we purchased and we stockpiled a lot of food in all of our welfare centers. And of course, we could deliver it immediately to our people. And of course, we could immediately open hotlines. And of course, we could immediately start calling all of the people, all of the Jews who are on our database, and offering them evacuation assistance. And this was the first thing that we did. We've opened hotlines and we've contacted all of the people. And we have huge databases over the 30 years of operation in Ukraine. As you can imagine, we have phone numbers of thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of Jews living in Ukraine and their family members. So we just started to immediately organize buses going to the western part of Ukraine and to the border with Poland and with Romania, and going to Moldova and opening immediately border tents. And now imagine if you have been on the road for 36 hours sitting on the bus without a possibility to go out and to drink some coffee and etc. and etc. And basically you were running for their life. And some people didn't even get their documents. They were so shocked they didn't even get their documents. And then when you finally arrive to those borders, and the first thing you see when you're crossing the border is the JDC and Jaffe tent that are giving you a warm cup of tea or coffee or soup, and it's winter and it's cold, and then giving you a warm hug. And suddenly you understand that you are not lost in this world, because when you were running, you didn't know where you were running, what's waiting for you. And suddenly you don't have to spend night in a Tesco refugee center, which was built on the Polish side of the border, where there were about 500 people sleeping in the same room. But you will be taken by the Jewish community. You will be taken to a former yeshiva school in Lublin. You will be taken to some hotel in Warsaw. You will be taken to other places, and the Jewish community will take care of you. This is indeed was life-changing for many people, and this is one of the first response that we have started in cooperation with a lot of other Jewish international organizations, of course. The second big thing which we started doing was humanitarian aid. And once again, in the first months of the war, it was impossible to buy food and to buy many kinds of medications in Ukraine. So basically what we started to do, we just started buying food and medications in different parts of the world, including in Israel. Medications we bought mainly in Israel, mostly in Israel. And we started sending them by planes to Chisinau in Moldova or to Poland, and then trucking all of those humanitarian assistance into Ukraine. We have opened humanitarian hubs in 3 cities in Ukraine, in Lviv and Chernivtsi and in Odessa. These are all border cities. So and then from those 3 cities, we already were tracking them in across Ukraine, to all of the cities in Ukraine. It was pretty hard because the many European drivers did not agree to get into Ukraine and to start, delivering food into Ukraine. It was very dangerous. So the best thing we managed was just to make sure they brought it to Lviv or to Chernivtsi or to Odessa, and then from there we were doing it ourselves. We have managed to deliver about 800 tons of humanitarian assistance into Ukraine in the first 4 months of the war. These all were purchased, of course, with the money from the JDC and from other organizations like the Claims Conference or World Jewish Relief, who helped us a lot in this endeavor. But on top of that, we were approached, and of course, this was basically mainly directed to the Jewish communities. But as you know, there is Tikkun Olam, and we have to help our brothers and sisters, and that is why 10-15% of this assistance has been given to the non-Jewish population. On top of that, we were approached here in Israel by the Israeli Friends of Ukraine. This is a local organization which collected, its people of Israel collected a lot of different kinds of stuff, including first aid kits, warm clothes, and other things. And they needed to airlift all of those things to Ukraine, to Poland, and then to Ukraine. Of course, this is very expensive, and they were looking for partners to help them with that. Again, JDC, even though we are a Jewish humanitarian organization, still we are a humanitarian organization, and we need to help people if they need help. So we have paid for over 120 tons of non-sectarian humanitarian assistance just to airlift it and to bring it to Ukraine, to non-Jewish populations. There are other examples of how we helped with the non-Jewish initiatives, starting with the hospital in Lviv that we are now partnering with, and we are bringing Sheba Hospital professors to that hospital in Lviv, and we are bringing the professionals from Lviv here to Israel to see how people are doing, how our Israeli professionals are doing prosthesis and rehabilitation, etc., and etc. So if I do it in a nutshell, basically, we have managed to help over 40,000 Jewish refugees with basic needs. These are the people who got food support, medication support, border line crossing support, transportation support, all of these different kinds of things. We are still taking care of 46,000 elderly and poor who remain inside Ukraine. Now, the situation in Ukraine, unfortunately, is not getting easier. People are getting used to it, I must say. People, there are more and more people who say, well, okay, there are rockets flying now. Well, there is a siren blaring, but it's just another thing. And I must say that from Ukrainian population of 40 million, about, I think about 12 million now are displaced internally or externally. I know that there are, and which is about a bit more than 25% of the population. The same applies to the Jewish community. Out of 200,000 people, we know that about between 40 to 50,000 have left their places of residence. They're displaced people internally or externally. And some of them are coming back, but amongst the elderly population, very few people left. Mostly people who are with children and with families were trying to leave, save their children. And the elderly people, most of them stayed, and we're there for them. We're continuing to help those people. But in addition to them, we now get two new groups of people that we have to help. One is IDPs, internally displaced people who didn't need our support before, who were pretty much independent, and all of a sudden now, a family from Kharkiv is now in Lviv, and you need to support them with paying for their apartment, giving them some subsidy for food, and etc. and etc. And there are thousands of such people. And then there are people who are so-called new poor, who stayed where they are, but their factory where they worked is bombed, the business where they worked has closed, and all of a sudden they don't have any means to provide for their family, and they need support. So JDC continues working with these people, and to these people we're also providing material support and subsidies. We're thinking now of opening employment initiative. We are, of course, opening trauma. We have opened actually already 7 trauma centers. And as His Excellency Ambassador said, people in Ukraine are deeply traumatized. There is not a single person in Ukraine who hasn't been traumatized by this experience. We've opened, like I said, 7 trauma centers in 7 big cities in Ukraine. We're looking to open more. We are launching this assistance with employment. And one more thing I would like to add, that's another big thing that is happening. It's the winter, and you see this is the map that was published by CNN in the end of November. And you can see here Ukraine, after one of the attacks, it's without electricity. So basically, this is the situation in Ukraine as of November, all of those blackouts, and what it means, a blackout in Ukraine. It just looks like this on the map, but basically, A blackout in Ukraine and anywhere else means that there are no traffic lights, there are no street lights, there are no lights inside. In many cases, there is no water supply. In many cases, there is no heating supply in your homes. And it's fine, you know, if you are an adult, and I was in Lviv at that time, at the moment when in November when those rockets struck, and you know, I managed. But I was thinking about some elderly person sitting on some 5th floor in her apartment, not being able to go down because the elevator isn't working, and there is a siren, for example, about the air raid attack, and she can't call anyone because her phone has been discharged, for example. Imagine the situation in which these people have to survive. So that is why the Winter Survival Initiative that we've launched. Winter Survival Initiative, and in this Winter Survival Initiative, in addition to regular, you know, winter food, winter clothes and boots and equipment and etc., basically we've provided people where necessary with food, where necessary with gas burners, because that's the only way you can cook your food. We've brought a lot of EcoFlows into Ukraine. These are special accumulators which can keep lights in your house for 60 hours during the blackout, or can keep, for example, an oxygen mask working for 12 hours, or can keep boilers and etc. And you can see that. I'm not gonna show a lot, but we've been ordering, special rehydrated food sets, which you can always have hot food at home. We've been ordering special food sets of self-heated food where you just put pressure on the lid and it will be heated. And we have opened warm hubs in our centers. We have equipped each and every Jewish building of the organization which we work with a generator. We've purchased over 31 generators and delivered them to our Cheseds and JCCs and Hillels and whoever asked, to make sure that there is always electricity, there is always heating, and there is always internet, and you can come and you can have a cup of hot tea and you can charge your devices and you can sleep there. If you need, you can sleep there as well. Again, these are just examples of those generators. This picture, for example, was the red generator was taken on, I was in Odessa about a month ago, and on my way to Hillel, there was a blackout. So, and when I got to Hillel, that's what I saw. The guys there were filling this generator with the diesel and making sure that that the programs work. One last thing that I want to say before I wrap up is there are two words describing Ukraine now, not only trauma. Trauma is word number one, but word number two is resilience. And this is amazing, and this is inspiring, and this is what gives us all hope, because we thought, well, now in times of the crisis, our main focus is going to be humanitarian aid and food and medications and evacuations and all of that things. But no, people in these times of turbulence, people need something solid. People need something which they still can control. People need something that doesn't go away from them. Everything went away from them: their homes, their lives, their husbands, their usual routine life. What did not go away is the Jewish community. What did not go away is Shabbat every week. What did not go away is the Hanukkah celebration in your local JCC. We're never closed. Not a single one of our JCCs or programs. And you can see here in one of the pictures, you can see that's Odessa. In the basement, people are celebrating Havdalah in the basement during the air raid attack. And I took this picture and I'm amazed. I am amazed. I will never cease to be amazed. The people in the other pictures are, they're making Hanukkah candles with the light torches on their heads. And again, those light torches is just, it looks like it's something small, but it gives opportunity for people to continue being there, and for our caregivers, for example, to continue providing support and navigating the dark streets when on their way to their clients. So with this, I'm going to finish. I could be speaking for hours, so I'm going to finish here and if you have more questions, I will be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Oksana, for your very moving and informative presentation. And thank you also for all the work that you and your colleagues have been doing, which I think is absolutely tremendous. And we've all been inspired both by the mobilization from individuals, from governments, but also from NGOs. And B'nai B'rith has been very proud to be playing a part in that, in all that work. If I can turn to Ambassador Brodsky, can I ask you to speak about Israel's engagement in the conflict? In particular, can you speak about the humanitarian assistance that Israel has provided? And secondly, whether Israel's new government might consider further support to Ukraine beyond humanitarian assistance?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, from the political point of view, Israel has had very clear, transparent position from the very beginning of war. At the very beginning of war, we not just supported the UN resolution denouncing Russian aggression, but we also became co-sponsors of this resolution. And we unequivocally denounced the Russian aggression, and we stick to the same position through the whole period of war, including the territorial integrity of Ukraine, the support of territorial integrity of Ukraine, and on many occasions we said that we stand with Ukraine, and this obviously is not going to change with the new government. On contrary, the minister, when he was visiting Kiev, he promised to expand the humanitarian assistance that we provided to Ukraine. And if at the beginning of war, we were focusing mainly on immediate needs, on urgent things like providing medicine, providing generators, providing food, fresh water, now we are speaking in terms of flagship projects, meaning that we want to assist Ukraine to rebuild the country, to recover the economy, and by this we mean that we will be involved in big-scale projects. We are still trying to figure out what are the Ukrainian needs, what are their preferences, but this dialogue has started. And I should mention one additional event that we organized in mid-December in Warsaw, a conference on the Israeli-Ukrainian relations, which focused on the question how Ukraine can become a big Israel. This is something that President Zelensky mentioned at some point at the beginning of war, that after the war, Ukraine will have no choice but to become a big Israel, meaning that it will have to develop its economy, it will have to develop its society despite the ongoing security threats, exactly like Israel. And this conference, which I believe was just the beginning of a long-term process, focused exactly on this question: how exactly Israel can assist Ukraine to become more resilient, to become stronger, with which technologies, which know-how, and which best practices can be implemented in the process of Ukraine's post-war recovery. So this work is still going on. But to your question regarding the humanitarian assistance, we've been focusing mainly on the medical field, since Israel's always been known for its high-quality medical services, and this has been our main field in which we provided assistance to Ukraine. And I should mention just a few out of a long list of projects that we implemented. Obviously, everyone knows about the field hospital, but also we received Ukrainian wounded soldiers for prosthetics and rehabilitations in Israel. We received tens of Ukrainian children with oncological diseases who are undergoing treatment in different Israeli hospitals. We also provided medicine. We provided medical devices to a children's hospital in Kiev, and so on. In addition, as I mentioned, we provided urgent humanitarian assistance, ready meals, fresh water, and so on. We also opened. We were the first embassy to open a how is it called? A center, was a tent basically where people could come and warm up and charge the gadgets to go online. Invincibility, in Ukraine they call it invincibility points. So we were the first embassy to open an invincibility point, but we were followed by the Kazakh embassy, who opened invincibility yurts in Kiev, which was a great initiative. Whilst continuing these humanitarian efforts, at the moment we are looking into more significant projects, flagship projects, which we could implement in Ukraine. And this was part of the dialogue that the minister conducted with both with the Minister of Foreign Affairs and with the President of Ukraine. So now we are at the stage where we're trying to figure out the most urgent needs of the Ukrainians and how Israel can address these needs. I believe that eventually we'll end up implementing some projects in the field, either in the field of health or in the field of infrastructure, including water management, because this is where Israel can contribute some added value, and this is exactly the fields that Israel has probably the best expertise in the world. So that's why we are focusing on these fields, and the Ukrainian side obviously agrees that this should be the direction. Now, regarding the facilitation process, exactly today you can read a very interesting article in Walla, the Israeli news, the Israeli website, which provides some inside information about the attempts on behalf of Israel, the attempts of former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett to facilitate and to negotiate between Russia and Ukraine. And you probably remember he visited to Moscow and his phone conversations with President Zelensky. At the moment, it's not on the table. I personally don't believe that both sides are ready to negotiate at this particular moment, but it doesn't mean that in the future, and probably even in the near future, it will not change. And our Prime Minister Netanyahu has already mentioned that if he is asked by both sides to contribute to the negotiation process, he will be happy to do it. And I wouldn't rule it out completely, although, as I said, at the moment, it's not on the table, and the situation is not ripe for any sort of negotiations.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And you sort of anticipated what I was going to ask about the possibility of brokering negotiations. So let me sort of maybe in general ask you what your sense is of the Jerusalem-Kyiv relationship at the moment, and perhaps to the extent that you can speak about it, the relationship with Moscow, and also, you know, what Israel's engagement moving forward.
I cannot refer to the relationship with Moscow since I'm ambassador in Ukraine and not in Moscow. Yeah. So I'm going to focus on the relationship between Israel and Ukraine. In a nutshell, I believe that these relations are back on track following these two very important visits, and the intention on behalf of Israel to expand its assistance to Ukraine. And I'm not speaking only about the humanitarian field, although the humanitarian assistance will become the main focus of Israel in Ukraine. But we have also discussed cooperation in other fields. For instance, Israel has committed to provide an early warning system to Ukraine against the rockets, and this is crucial for Ukraine. As you know, the existing warning system is definitely not perfect, it's quite outdated, and if we manage to provide assistance to Ukraine and to implement it in Ukraine, to adjust it to the Ukrainian needs, it will, I believe, it will change dramatically the situation, because it will enable us to know more or less exactly where the rockets are aiming, and it will change the behavior of the population in Ukraine, because they might take the threats more seriously. Because at the moment, as already has been mentioned, people disregard the threats. They don't believe that it is important to hide in the situation of rocket alarm. And if we manage to say precisely where the rocket will hit, I think it will affect the human behavior in Ukraine. So this is important, and we've discussed some other venues of cooperation. But as I said, at the moment the focus is on the future and ongoing and future rebuilding of Ukraine and the rehabilitation of Ukraine.
Thank you.
Also, last week when I was in Kiev, I met President's spouse, Olena Zelenska, and we discussed humanitarian cooperation in mainly in the field of post-trauma. And Israel has already done a lot to assist Ukraine in this field. We've educated tens of psychologists and social workers from Ukraine in Israel offline and probably hundreds online on this particular issue. And this is going to be one of the main issues that Ukraine will face both during the war and after the war. And this is something which obviously won't go away after the war will end. And unfortunately, it's a long-term process, but Israel is ready to continue this cooperation with Ukraine on this field, and we have a lot to contribute.
Thank you. And Your Excellency, if I could just stay with you for one more question. Recently, we've seen Iran supplying drones to Russia to use on the battlefield of Ukraine. Now, of course, as we know, Iran is Israel's main regional nemesis. I wonder how you think that has factored into the kind of bilateral and multilateral dynamics.
Well, we discussed it also during the conversation that we had in Kiev last week, and we see the situation eye to eye. And we see Iran as a common threat, both to Israel and to Ukraine. And we agreed to cooperate on the international arena in order to limit the threat and to try and neutralize the threat that the Iranians are posing. It definitely worries us a lot, and we were absolutely open about it. This military cooperation between Russia and Iran is very dangerous. And we know that these drones, which are at the moment used against the civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, can be used more against the Israeli citizens or the Israeli infrastructure. And we see a clear danger. That's why we are studying the Ukrainian experience. And with the members of Knesset, we even had an opportunity to see physically the drones. We were taken to one of the research institutes where they keep the drones that were found in Ukraine, and we could clearly see that these drones were provided during the war by Iran to Russia and were used against the population and the civil infrastructure in Ukraine. So we have already quite significant cooperation with Ukraine on this issue.
Thank you very much for those insights, Ambassador. And perhaps as we're moving towards the concluding part of our program, Oksana, coming back to you. Humanitarian assistance, as has been made evident by your intervention, is very much still needed. What would you say are the most necessary forms of assistance now to an audience following along today that is quite committed to this topic? What would you encourage them to be focusing on? How can people be involved?
There are a few ways to be involved. Number one is spread the word and just be aware of what's going on in Ukraine. And even though Ukraine is not any longer on the first pages of the newspapers, but the crisis hasn't still finished and will not be finished anytime soon. And Ukraine will need a lot of support of different kinds for a long time. Number two, donate. That's the easiest and the most effective way to do impact. Donate to the organizations that you trust and donate to the organizations that have boots on the ground. It is important to have boots on the ground because then you can easily see the needs, and you don't have to ask someone for that. But if you have such organizations that you trust and that have boots on the ground, donate to them. Of course, JDC is one of those organizations. while very known everywhere, right? And it's easily found on the website. And we have an open campaign, open fundraising campaign that we've opened in the first days of the war. We are continuing, we're not closing it. We have fundraised already quite a substantial amount of money. We're not stopping because the needs are still there. Many people are asking me about different kinds of in-kind donations. It's good, but I always, when I'm speaking to people, I always call on to them not to send just whatever you have available. Please consult with the people on the ground, with the organizations on the ground, what is needed, because if you are just saying something that you have available, it may not be needed for that particular organization. Always needed, of course. Like now, but for this winter, we were collecting winter clothes, and we would be absolutely happily receiving accumulators and power banks and everything connected with the blackouts in Ukraine. So like I said, generators, it's too big a thing, but again, some people are bringing generators too. Accumulators, I would say now, because generators, you can use them only in the buildings of the organizations, but if you want to help individual people, you'd better bring accumulators like EcoFlow or things like that, which will keep electricity at home. And then, lots of, basically, when we're looking ahead, we don't know what the next winter will look like. We don't know what the electricity situation will look like. We know definitely that trauma is the need. We know definitely that employment is the need, but these are the things that need to be provided locally. And for that, we just need money in order to hire or train specialists or to build partnerships with, for example, some Israeli IT companies who could hire Ukrainian IT professionals online to do the work for them online. This is also something which is on our thoughts and ideas. There are many ways that we all could help Ukraine. But again, the easiest way, I think, is donating to those who are already doing work on the ground.
Thank you very much, Oksana. And I think we all hear your call about keeping the spotlight on, both literally, as you were describing, but also metaphorically, as we're also trying to do with today's program. And Ambassador, without asking you to make too much of a prediction, is there anything you're hopeful about that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, personally, I hope that this war will end soon, but this is just a hope. It's not based on any particular knowledge. But everyone is hoping that at least by the summertime, there will be some sort of window of opportunity to at least to reach a ceasefire. This is kind of common knowledge among those who possess at least some information. So I really hope that sooner rather than later we'll be able to get. I'm talking about the embassy will be able to get back to Kyiv with our families on a permanent basis, and the life will get back to normal. I think we're all tired of this war, of this totally pointless war, and I really hope that it will be over rather sooner than later.
Well, thank you very much to both our speakers, Ambassador Brodsky, Oksana. Grateful to have your insights on really such an important day. And in closing, it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Alan Miller, National President of B'rith U.K, to conclude the event and share his thoughts.
Thank you, Alina, for giving us this opportunity. As we stand here on the 12-month anniversary of a year which none of us could have predicted, today has given us a time for reflection. Not that we haven't been reflecting over the last 12 months. The horrors of the war have been brought home quite graphically to us every day. In the UK, we are fortunate that we already had good relationships with people in Israel that we had visited, in Ukraine, that we had visited Ukraine only a few years before the war started. And we knew people in Chernovitzy, in Kyiv, and in Odessa.
So we were able to spring into action immediately, but we had no idea what was actually awaiting for us. I'm really honored to have been present today and to hear you, Your Excellency, talking about Israel's relationship with Ukraine, the help that you've been giving and the medical aid that you have been giving and will continue to give. Oksana, you really have been faced with a phenomenal task of trying to get in the aid. I know that World Jewish Relief in the United Kingdom has had all the similar problems and challenges that you have faced. The figures that you have given us have been absolutely staggering. The number of people who have been displaced, the amount of aid that has been required, the type of aid that's been required. You've done a fantastic job, and I thank you sincerely from all of us for all you've done. I know that we have concerns in the UK at the moment. How are things going to turn out? Are we going to see a quick resolution? It doesn't look like it. How are we going to be continuing to be able to finance the aid that's required for another 12 months? It's a big ask, but I can assure everybody, and those in Ukraine especially, that our resilience and our determination to help will not be dimmed. Humanitarian aid, this has been said many times, is in the DNA of B'nai B'rith and will continue to be so. And from our own personal experience, we know that when we have tried to give aid at a time of blackout, of no electricity, as Oksana has said, to try and get in contact with people, those that haven't left the country are very much those that are aged and infirmed. They're stuck in flats, in tower blocks. They have no electricity. We're trying to deliver medical aid to them through our program in Kyiv. The drivers are being conscripted. You can't even ring the doorbell. You have to go up manually, up, maybe 9 flights of steps to get there. Extremely difficult, but as I said, our resolve is not dimmed and we are continuing. I know that in Chernovitzy, they're receiving a van that's going to be delivered from Romania in the next few days for international aid, but Jewish life is continuing. So I thank everybody for participating today. Oksana, 2 words that sum up today that you mentioned will remain with me, and that is trauma and resilience. We wish everybody well. We will continue our support. We hope and we pray that peace will come quickly. Thank you for your time. May I wish everybody concerned today Shabbat Shalom, and thank you again for participating in today's program. Thank you.